evident from increase in frequency of super cyclones. During last few years, another example is groundwater table of Chennai, and there are some cities across the globe which has completely dried down their water table. And in Chennai, it has gone below 2000 feet at many places. And according to the Niti Aayog, soon the groundwater of Chennai will be completely exhausted. It's a wake-up call for all of us. And coming to steel industry, the steel industry contributes around 7% of GHG emission, the total GHG emission of the globe. And for India, it is 8%. And BF route, we the steel manufacturer, predominantly the steel comes from BF route, around 60%, and rest from other DRI and EF route. So our NDC target to our commitment to UNFCCC post Paris was basically 33 to 35% of our GDP, that emission intensity, the India has committed. But recently the same has been revised post Glasgow. As you might be aware that Glasgow has been a big success. This was an event which basically sensitized all across all the countries, most of the countries, and most of the countries have planned for net zero. So our Honorable Prime Minister committed India's commitment in terms of those Panchamrit, which has cascaded down to industry level, to ministry level. And those Panchamrit targets are basically quite, those are very, very bit practical, but very stringent. And in fact, those 5, including the net zero, he has clearly figured out that we'll have to achieve 500 gigawatt from non-fossil fuel. I'm just repeating just to sensitize those participants. I know everybody knows it, but reiterating the same thing over and over and again, it comes to our mind and we act accordingly. So that's why I'm repeating those Panchamrit targets. Reducing our economy's carbon intensity by 45%, which has been re-ratified by cabinet recently and communicated to UNFCCC again. And our 50% of energy kitty should come from renewable energy. This will reduce around 1 billion tons of carbon emission. And achieving net zero, India's doomsday is 2070 for energy curators and environmentalists. Coming to BF today's seminar, this is very pertinent, and we have very reputed panelists like they are from Ernst & Young, they are the big names, and MN Dastoor, I think they have been partnered India in our growth trajectory. They are very old consultant in the steel industry and other industries. So this Ernst & Young, Deloitte, and MN Dastoor, it will be really a delight listening from them, and looking forward to have a very fruitful session. I just want to throw one, give just a thought to everyone, just to a food for thought, that steel industry in India is operating from last so many years, and most of the traditional steel makers, they are adopting their BF route. Here is a lot of retrofit challenges there. Technologies are there. There are so many technologies available which can reduce your carbon footprint, but dovetailing those technology in our current process is really a tough task. It's like having a mark for a Mazda car and matching it with the Honda City and the Volkswagen. So things are really tough, but we are right on track, because when our highest authority in India, our Honorable Prime Minister has committed to, so it has cascaded down to steel ministry level, various ministries, including the power and steel, all those ministries which deal with the red category, those 17 category industries. So for steel industry, the target was earlier set for those BF route, it was 2.2 to 2.4 ton per ton of crude steel. This was basically in consultation with Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Then 2.6 to 2.7 for DRI AF route. But this is again being revised. There is one draft document that is on anvil. BE has been, Bureau of Energy Efficiency has been given a target. They have already conducted a meeting in July with Indian Steel Association. So earlier they were thinking of giving the target of 1.7, which was too stringent, too harsh. So in steel industry, they defended, they thought that it will not be achievable. They gave their opinion, feedback. So based on that, it is going to be revised. And we are expecting somewhere 1.9 to 2.1 for BF route. This is also very tough, because raw material quality, one very important point, parameter, which affects our this reduction process, which affects our energy consumption, because you must be knowing the steel industry is energy intensive, carbon intensive. And if we think of in our current process, there are three parameters. One, by improving our operational efficiency, you can improve your carbon emission and reduction and energy efficiency. This go hands on hand. So if you focus in current process on your operational efficiency, your rest of the things will be in place. But for operational efficiency, you have so many constraints. You have low grade iron ore because there are so many rich iron ore reserves have been exhausted. Like for sale also, we are not able to operate Syria, which has been very rich in iron ore because of so many environmental reasons. So if India has to produce 300 million tons, because Steel Ministry in their steel vision policy, they have come out with 300 million ton of steel making, because already we are the second largest producer in world. We have surpassed rest of the countries. We are only after China. We are producing 300. We'll be producing 300 million ton in by 2030. This is a good news for everyone, for infrastructure development of the country, for the steel makers, for the development of the economy. But bad news for all of us, for environmentalists, because if you produce 300 million ton, your CO2 emission are going to be multiplied on pro rata basis. So mitigating will be definitely a tough thing. And other part is the waste management. If you produce 300 million ton steel, you will be producing around 150 odd million tons of waste. So a lot of things have to be done to optimize your process, to optimize your technology. For greenfield, there is no challenge. You can adopt best of the best technology. All like you have CDQ, you have TRT, you can hydrogen injection, everything you can do. But for brownfield, there is a challenge. We would like to hear from Ansiang. We would like to hear from Deloitte and M. Dastur. How in our current process, making little small changes, we can improve our footprint. We are not basically conservative about our investments. We are ready to invest things in the technology, but it should deliver good results, immediate results, tangible results. So looking forward to have a wonderful seminar. Welcome everyone again, Mr. Pandian, Mr. Arvind Prasad, and Mr. Saurabh to have a wonderful session. And Nitesh will be there to coordinate the session. And thank you everyone for joining us, and looking forward for a wonderful seminar. Welcome again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, a very good evening to all of you. I think respected Mr. Singhal from Chairman IEI, Mr. Naveen Prakash Srivastava, Chairman Bokaro Local Center, Mr. Sunil Kumar, Honorary Secretary, Bokaro Local Center. I believe this climate change and this global warming is impacting the world in a big way. As per the IPCC report, approximately 3.3 to 3.6 billion people are living in a highly vulnerable climate hotspot, and climate change is also putting approximate 4% of global GDP at risk due to storms, wildfire, flood, and drought. And India is also going to be one of the worst hit nations. As per the recent report by this National Center for Coastal Research, approximately 100 meters of coastal land within Chennai will be submerged in sea in the next 5 years. And approximately 16% of Chennai would be submerged by 2100. So in the next 5 years, all the resort and the big hotels that are lying in the sea line of big cities like Mumbai, Kolkata, as well as Chennai, they are under threat because of climate change. Also, climate change will be impacting this food security in a big way, and it's going to impact our life of everyone. And I believe that steel is going to play a big role as far as this climate resilient society is concerned, because steel is one of the most environment friendly material which can be recycled 100% without losing its properties. And I believe today India is on a crossroad with a capacity of 120 million ton. We are the second largest steel producer. We are going to produce 300 million ton by 2030 and approximately 520 by 2050. So you can see approximate 300 million ton are right now in planning stage. So it's a very important juncture where we can plan the right approach, the right technology that we should adopt for making steel, whether we should go for DRI EF route, whether we should go for BF route. So I believe this is the right time where we can decide how we can proceed further, because I believe that China has already gone beyond 1,000 million ton, and still is industry having a lot of inertia. So once you plan something, you can't change it midway. So right now, India is having an opportunity how we should plan our steel sector in the next few years. And for that, we have three eminent personality panelists from various firms. So without wasting further time, I request Mr. Gokul Pandian from Ernst and Young to start, Director Ernst and Young to start the presentation on GHG mitigation and steel sector. Gokul, please, you will get just 30 minutes. And at the end of the session, or all the three sessions, we'll have a question answer. So, Gokul, please start your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Nitesh. And thank you, Chairman, and the co-panelist and the other participants who are in the webinar. So I will just present my screen. Hope you're able to see my screen.
Yeah, Gokul, it's visible. Just go on.
Yeah. Thank you for the context setting. Yes, it's well known that we are in the juncture of developments and the ongoing development which is going to happen in the steel sector, and I would touch upon some of the key aspects. We know about the overview, which I don't want to spend too much of time, but I would like to look at how the GHG emissions assessment has been done, and how this is being taken up by other steel players in the market. What are the global technologies, like Nitesh ji, you had highlighted about China, so what are they trying to do? And similarly, I have a couple of case studies around what's happening across the world, in terms of like maybe 3-4 case studies, and some case studies around national, which probably you might be knowing it, but still I would like to cover it. And last, I would like to provide a summary of what are the different technologies that can come in our way, and with kind of emission reduction potential as well as the commercial aspects, right? So I'll quickly jump upon it. We had discussed on this particular point, but still I would like to take up these two. We had a quick discussion. These two we have had a quick discussion. We know China is leading the game with, and then it's being followed by India. And this also, Mr. Srivastav clearly mentioned, we are talking about 7% of the global emissions. India, it's about 8%. And from the intensity standpoint, that you look at, the global average is 1.7, and then we are at 2.4, and we also have had aim to reduce to, say, from 2.8, 2.4 to 1.8, 1.9. That's primarily because we do have a lot of POF. And we also know that from 120 tons that we would like to jump to 300 million tons. There's a lot of greenfield addition which is going to happen. While we all clearly know that there are certain restrictions and challenges that you will have in making a lot of retrofit. We'll touch upon some of the aspects of it, but yeah, you being the steel sector expert, and of course you all of us know about it, like what are the areas, what are the challenges, how do we retrofit, how do we move forward. And we also try to learn from what's happening on the other side of the world, so that we will have the future construction could be clean green. So from the net zero targets and global statuses, I would like to quickly touch upon India. We are talking about 2070. So we have a target, and it was clearly articulated by Mr. Srivastav. We are really looking at absolute contraction of emissions by 2070. And it's not only us, globally, majority of the countries, the big ones, are already looking at the net zero commitments, right? From European Union, Japan, China, US, all of them are having their targets, and they also have a significant steel presence globally, and they are also looking at various new technologies to be implemented, so that they can actually go for the path forward of net zero. So to the benefit of the participants, I would like to quickly touch upon what exactly net zero, which I don't want to spend too much of time, but still I just give you a quick glimpse. If you simply take a science-based target without any commitments, basically the arrow mark which talks about the overall emissions, that overall emissions comprises your scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. Scope 1 is basically all the direct combustion in your processes that could in your plant, which could be process emissions as well as the fuel emissions. Scope 2, the procurement of any energy, could be electricity or any other energy. And scope 3, whatever the emissions which happening outside the project boundary. So this is your emissions, and you would like to go down without having any commitment. You can follow science-based approach, but you don't need to give any commitments. It's a simple target that we can pick it up. Second one that we pick up on carbon neutral, whatever the emissions that we have, we can have offset programs. Your emissions will not absolutely reduce, whereas you can able to purchase offsets from the market so that you will be neutral in terms of carbon emissions. And third, you talk about net zero, which is what we all have committed. Basically, you are looking for an absolute contraction of emissions, whatever the emissions that we have. Then be a base year. The base year could be the current year. And we'll have either a near-term or long-term target. Long-term targets, you can go maximum till 2050. And of course, we had committed in 2070, and we will follow that path by 2070. Whatever the emission that we have had today, only 10% that we can keep it. Rest all of them have to be absolutely reduced. And carbon negative is beyond carbon neutral, beyond net zero. That means if we go beyond it, then we'll have carbon negative. So this is a nutshell. This is to give a quick overview. So what are the approach generally people are looking at? There are three broad approaches. One, you can go for a decarbonization. It's a complete reduction of GHG emissions from the atmosphere. Second, you go for a neutralization, where you will go for a carbon sink programs, like, you can go for an urban forestry, where the third component of our NDC talks about 1.1 to 2 billion tons of CO2, which will be reduced through forestry, right? That's a kind of neutralization program which government has, and it can be implemented by various public sector enterprises or directly with the government of India. The third one is going to be the compensation emissions, primarily through carbon credits. So where there will be some quality projects which will be built by some other firm, and where we can actually procure carbon credits. So this is going to be the third way of looking at it. But more of, if you look at from the net zero standpoint, decarbonization is going to be more important, because neutralization and compensation, you can only look for 10% of the residual emissions. The rest, all of them are going to go for decarbonization. That's the reason it's very significant to look at, or I would say it's profound to look at decarbonization as an option rather than go for neutralization and compensation. So in the entire value chain, if I would like to map, because it's important to understand where exactly we are going to have emissions, because majority of them actually would be thinking that, okay, we are only looking at the scope 1 and 2 emissions, and we also need to understand scope 3 is also a significant number where we need to go for, because whenever we want to take up a net zero commitment, it's not only 1 or 2 emissions, which it also a scope 3 emissions, because whenever the scope 3 whenever the scope 3 emissions contribute to more than 40% of the total emissions in a particular industry, obviously scope 3 emissions also will be coming to the play. So considering that, if you look at our manufacturing processes, it's primarily going to be scope 1 emissions, because it's a process emissions, where it can emissions from the coke plant or iron ore sintering and BOF, it all come under the scope 1 emissions. Then whatever the fuels that we use, it's going to be part of 1 and 2, because many of the plants, they will be manufacturing, they'll be producing energy in-house or electricity in-house. It could be both scope 1 and 2 emissions. And rest, all of them, if you say transportation, distribution, raw material consumables, and all other contribution, it could be a part of a scope 3. So how this is getting panned out? So it's getting panned out basically through the emission factors. The emission factors have been determined by various agencies. It could be World Steel Association, we have Central Electricity Authority, IPCC, and Equipment. These are some of the agencies which are actually providing the emission factors. If you look at this, so this is just a typical integrated iron and steel plant, primarily dependent on the resources which are available locally. Okay, that kind of a plant which I'm talking about. It's not majority of the raw materials are actually either imported or raw material being procured directly, like a scrapper, etc. Okay, if you look at it, scope 1 emissions, if you see, it's about almost 67%, scope 2 is 6, and scope 3 is 27. It's not necessarily this is the ratio for all the plants. Majority of the plants, the scope 3 emissions are still on the higher side, but yeah, in the current assessment, if you see, this is going to be 27%. And scope 3, we all know there are about more than 15 categories, and we are primarily highlighting about some of the categories, which is purchase goods and services, use of sold products. These are going to be major ones for us from the scope 3 standpoint, and there are other activities which can also contribute to the emissions. So when we look at the decarbonization aspects, you need to look at all of the aspects in one way or the other, so that we will be able to completely have a control on all the emissions together. So this we would know very well when it comes to scope 1, because scope 1 we also saw it 67%. And if you would like to split across, major ones are going to be sintering and the iron making and the steel making. This is going to contribute more than 60% of the emissions, and rest all of them are going to have a significant play. Whereas these three put together, you are going to major emissions where we need to go for a higher play. So some of the global aspects that I'd like to talk about is that some steel that we picked it up, and if you look at Tata Steel, we are talking about 26%, and 72% is going to be scope 1, 26% is scope 3, and JSW is 86% scope 1, and rest of them are scope 1 and scope 2. So why this percentage is higher that's also primarily because not all of them are actually disclosing the complete scope 3 emissions, because scope 3 emissions certainly going to be a major one for all of them. If you started producing data around all 15 categories of emissions, then scope 3 emissions are going to be a major item. But as of now, even globally, the emission intensity is being calculated only on scope 1 and scope 2. But what SBT, science-based target, says, you have to include both scope 1, 2, and 3. So again, it's a snapshot of what different steel producers are saying, but I don't want to touch too much on that. So okay, so how the global steel makers are actually looking at to embark their starting on the decarbonization journey. So they all start with energy intensity reduction. So which all your energy efficiency interventions day in, day out, that plant is sweating their hard sweat on implementing major energy efficient interventions, which are anyways highlighted in various technology component, etc., which I don't want to touch too much, whereas it certainly have a major impact on their emission reductions. It's about 3 to 5% we really look at in energy intensity reduction. Second, we look at the decarbonization, where we look at either a technology retrofit, or it could be an alternate fuel retrofit. There's going to major change, which I'll have some case studies which I would like to take you through. And third is we look at the circular economy, where wherever possible the scrap reuse, or wherever possible the recycle options, and all of that put together, it comes into your circular economy. And the fourth is the material efficiency. Wherever possible, we need to look for how we will optimally use the materials, so that you will be able to bring efficiency in the material production, because it's going to be an intertwine of both the material management, recycle management, and of course the energy and the carbon management. So that's all going to give you a decarbonization perspective, rather than putting a high lens on energy efficiency, because energy efficiency is certainly going to bring your emissions down, but still we need to look at other aspects as well. So we know what are the levers. I don't want to delve, but I would like to clearly say, as I mentioned, energy efficiency is certainly one option, and we have renewable energy, circular economy, biomass, hydrogen, CCS, electrification of heat, and other novel technologies, which certainly are shaping up the overall decarbonization scenario. Okay, now what are the top 10 steel major actions on decarbonization? Right, it's important to know what other people are doing. The private segment is doing. If you look at ArcelorMittal, they are of course 5.2% of the global production. The emission intensity is about 2.1. They want to reduce 30% of it by 2030. So how would they want to do? They plan for an investment of almost 40 billion euros. So what would they do with the investment is primarily they have launched a program called X-Corp. X-Corp is kind of a trademark by the ArcelorMittal entire group. They want to bring together all the activities which I mentioned in the previous slide, which talks about renewable energy, which is energy intensity, decarbonization, circular economy, and the material efficiency put together. They would like to form all of them together with respect to various options. They form this program, which has various list of technologies which they would like to implement it. Second is the Bao Steel, where we want to learn from China. So what exactly they're trying to do. They also have a planned investment of about 45 million in the low carbon steel. And they also would take up a target of 30% reduction by 2025, where China is like betting high on green hydrogen. I have one slide also, case study, which I'll take you through. The Nippon Steel is basically they follow the Japan commitment, which is called Course 50, which is called a CO2 Ultimate Reduction System for Cool Earth 2050. The Cool Earth 2050 is a concept which was conceptualized by late Mr. Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, and that was like further taken up, and then they formed new thing which is called Course 50. And that Course 50 talks about various reduction options in the DRI processes, EAF processes through hydrogen, and that's primarily what Nippon Steel is trying to look at. POSCO, they come up with a new technology, which probably we also know, it's called Finex technology, which I'll have on slide, I'll take you through. And ThyssenKrupp, they also have taken up a target of 30% cut by 2050. And they also, primarily looking at the options to decarbonize. So in the nutshell of my assessment, what we have seen is that people are primarily looking at how they can actually, while everybody is looking at the energy efficiency as a potential option, they also try to look at like how can we go for an alternate material, how can we go for an alternate new technology, because that's what we have seen as the global purview. So first one, I would like to pick up the Bauer Steel, which I will quickly take you through, and I can share the slides because I'm also not a very technical person, but I would like to give this kind of not as good technical as you are, but I would like to quickly take you through this aspect. So they have divided this entire processes into a couple of buckets, I would say. The first one, from the sintering, they would like to look at, are there any possibility of using green electricity? And they are also trying to look at the green hydrogen generation for that can be used for the DRI process. DRI process generally, it's be used either through coal or the natural gas. Can they say that can we go for a green hydrogen? That's started coming in the commercial scale. And this also can, they also plan to introduce a hydrogen injection in the plants, so that they can able to have better recycling of H2, and then they also have planned for the CO2 emissions. This is a Bauer Steel that they have. And wherever possible, they go for a green electricity, right? Green electricity from the renewable energy. So that's primarily, I would say, is the major intervention which Bauer Steel is trying to look at. Bauer Steel is trying to look at, as I mentioned, the green part of the electricity plus green part of hydrogen. This is in summary that we see from Bauer Steel. And they also have planned for many digital interventions where they can able to control the air fuel ratio. They can also control the temperature, so that you will have a right mix of air and gas, and you will be able to optimize your FD fan ratios and the temperature ratios. And it also definitely, as I mentioned, energy efficiency always will bring you a saving of say 2 to 5%, through optimization, right? And the second is the POSCO. This is a technology basis. It's a technology, basically, I would like to say is that this particular technology, what it does is that it takes the fine wars, it takes the fine, it takes the fine wars into fine particles, and then they try to pass through this, fluidized bed combustion. And they also have a melting gasifiers. Basically, that melting gasifier is charged directly with the coal, and that coal, the output from this fines are going to be the fine, which is heated fines, are going to go as a iron ore in terms of kind of a compact billets. And this is getting reduced. There's a lot of gas which is going to come out. That gas is being fed back into this, so that when the fine ores are getting passed through this, and the fine ores are getting heated, and then it's kind of reduced, and then the further reduction which happens in your melting gasifiers. And that's where you will be able to avoid, number one, we are not going to use any coke here, so because the coke plant is straight away getting avoided, and there is no sinter plant or maybe pelletization plant that is also getting avoided, so that there is a lot of carbon savings. And I have some article around it. I mean, this seems like this is up for a commercial production, as well as this is also up for scale up. I would say that South Korea, the POSCO Steel is actually scaling up another 2 million tons of steel using this Finex technology. And they also look at a Hyrex process. We have the Midrex process in India. And for the DRA, and they're also going for Hyrex. So Hyrex, basically, they're looking at, instead of natural gas, can we go for a green hydrogen? Right, it's as simple as it is, so that we can actually replace that fuel with the hydrogen. And the Nippon Steel, as I mentioned, there's a Course 50. The Course 50 is a combination of various technologies, right from your CCS to waste heat recovery, as well as and then increase of hydrogen in the processes, so that you will be able to have a mix of both energy efficiency and the hydrogen put together. So we will be able to have a reduction in the process emissions, as well as we'll be able to have reduction in the CO2 emissions as well, because it will be too much dependent on hydrogen rather than coal. And again, ThyssenKrupp is the same. It basically have bet high on hydrogen, right? And similarly, they also look for another process which is called carbon to chem. The carbon to chemical is basically whatever the CO2 which they try to require, and then try to produce what are the chemical processes which are applicable. So these 4 case studies, what it says is that whatever the projects which we want to do it in upcoming, I think definitely SAIL also will have a lot of targets, and how we need to look at various options for our future expansion. Certainly, I think these technologies, we can look at it. Yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to be compatible with the existing scenario, but still we can actually consider this in the future expansions. Some of the national overview I would like to talk about is that, Tata Steel is looking at some kind of a regenerative burner, which probably you might be knowing it. They try to utilize some of the available surplus blast furnace gas for heating of the slabs, so that they will be able to save almost like energy of more than 2,800 tons of oil equivalent, and then they were able to quickly recover these options. This is one. Second, we also talk about some of the direct charging by one of the Bajrang Power and Ispat Limited. They directly roll from the hot continuous gas billet to produce the TMT bars, and thereby they were able to save a saving of almost like 4,000 tons of oil equivalent. And again, the investment of about 2 crores, and they were able to recover it quickly in 2 months. And some of the other quick interventions, probably you might be knowing. I don't want to touch too much on this. So the other opportunities I try to talk about, wherever possible, I think there is a scrap reuse seems to be one of the major area, where the moment we all know that whenever we try to use scrap, where we'll be able to save on material, energy, and emissions. The only challenge that we might face in the scrap is that availability of scrap itself. There are many companies, for example, some of the stainless steel company which we are working, so they're primarily operating through 65% scrap, and only 35% they are trying to get the ore, and then they use it. So there is a scrap which is still available, and of course every scrap to get produced takes almost like 15 years. Biomass is another one that we are really looking at. But yeah, the levelized cost is still high, because instead of using coal to coke, we can use biomass and convert to charcoal, and that can be start using it now. But all the industries are actually looking at biomass. It's an opportunity, as well as it's going to be an expensive proposition as well. CCS. Only a pilot has happened, but lot of companies are actually looking up how we can use CCS, because CCS, the main challenge that we face in the CCS is that how do we separate the pure carbon dioxide from whatever the gas that we have, because it's in carbon monoxide state. So can we able to bring out the carbon dioxide and the hydrogen separately, so that we'll be able to use the carbon dioxide? Otherwise, that's going to be the major challenge. That's the reason, if you see the carbon abatement cost per ton is actually on the way higher side. It's about 140-300. So hydrogen also, I would like to give a quick view. There are discussion, as I mentioned, China is also trying to look at hydrogen. There are many, even the POSCO is also looking at hydrogen. So when we assess the hydrogen, so we look at the BF option and then the DRA option. The hydrogen costs are extremely high as on date. We expect that why hydrogen cost is very expensive with the green hydrogen is primarily because electrolysis cost was still 80% of the cost, and that's very expensive. When the scale increases, maybe by 28 to 28 or 29, FY 28 or 29, there's a high probability that the levelized cost of hydrogen can come down significantly. That's what the various research report says. And if that comes under the green, then it's a high possibility that we can also have green hydrogen available. And there are a lot of players. We all know that they are all up for hydrogen making. The moment it comes that because we do have a green hydrogen policy wherever we can actually generate electricity, and the electricity can be transported without having any interstate transmission charges. Interstate transmission charges, that's an advantage for us to even manufacture hydrogen and test it and pilot it in the plants. So in summary, I would like to talk about this one particular slide, which talk, scrap EAF, where it's 80% reduction possible, and it's commercial. It's already reached its commercial stage. But only thing is that we need to look for high scrap supply, which is needed, where we need to identify players where they can able to produce scrap. They can give scrap. Smelting, of course, Corex, I think, even SAIL is also talking about some of the coal reduction process technologies, where we have an opportunity to reduce 4 to 20% is commercial. And of course, there's going to be a lot of gas which is going to get developed and generated, that needs to see that how we are going to, have a plant around it. The BFB with the biofuel, 20 to 50% reduction, which is possible. And there's a high quantity of biofuel which is needed. Increase your transportation, storage costs, etc. So that's going to be kind of a challenge, whereas it has a potential reduction. On the carbon capture, there is significant, as on date, there is a significant increase in production cost. It's going to take commercial horizon not less than say 5 to 10 years. Hydrogen, it's as on date, we also were not able to assess it because it's going to take another 10 years. And the natural gas based DRA, natural gas, we were all looking at the natural gas as a potential option, but as we are out facing the what kind of a situation, not kind of situation, war situation, the natural gas prices have significantly shot up to almost like $50 per MMBTU, which was say $8 to $9 per MMBTU. And if that gas reduced, say the prices are expected to get reduced, say to maybe $15 to $16 per MMBTU, then there's a high chance that natural gas will come back to the game. And the blue and green hydrogen are it's still far off, and ion electrolysis, another technology, is still going to far off. So what we see in nutshell is that there are very few options from us that we need to look at as a hard to abate, which are commercial in nature. This is a reality. However, there is a lot of discussions which are happening in the annual. To sum up, I would say hydrogen certainly an area. Finex is a technology which is commercial. It's commercial scale. And some of the biomass-based options which are still possible. Green hydrogen is not very far. And from having said, I would like to sum up my presentation, and thank you so much for listening. I'm able to provide some kind of an insights to each of you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gokul. It was very enlightening presentation, and thanks a lot for the insight you have given. I think at the end of this session, after Saurav and Abhinav, we can have the question session.
Yeah.
I believe Saurav is business unit leader, consulting MN Dastur Private Limited. Saurav, I think you can start the presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ranjan. Let me just try and share my screen. Please let me know if it's visible.
Yeah, Saurav, it's visible. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. It was great hearing the views of Mr. Srivastav and also Gokul earlier to this. MN Dastur is known for working in the steel industry for decades now, and particularly in the area of decarbonization, energy transition. The part of the Dastur which works is known as the Dastur Energy, and we have been working in this area for some time now. Today, I want to talk a bit about the decarbonization challenge facing different industries, specifically the decarbonization challenge for the steel industry, and what we have seen through our work, what has been our experience, what seems to be, what is likely to work, what is not likely to work, some thoughts on that. Okay, so first I want to talk a little bit about the decarbonization challenge. So the challenge is really, if you look at either global emissions or hello, can you continue?
Yeah, Saurabh, please go ahead.
There's an echo. Okay. So if you look at global emissions or emissions in India, uh, and the breakup of the emissions from different sectors and different industries, only about 30% comes from electricity, and this is what at most we can target. Even if we reach in the Indian context, we reach 500 gigawatt of renewables. We have less intermittency. We have storage. This is the emissions that we can really target through renewables, renewable energy and renewable electricity. And particularly if you look at the other sectors, the large and concentrated emitters, industrial sectors account for over 30% of CO2 emissions. And particularly the industrial sector is very hard to decarbonize, very hard to electrify, because they have processes which have reached scale, and we have used to using this process for decades, and to change the entire process or to electrify the process seems very difficult, not only because the fossil fuels are used as a source of energy, but it is also used as a in many industrial processes. It is part of the process. It is used in the reaction. So they are very difficult to electrify and substitute. And particularly if you look at India, the sectors which are the largest emitters, steel, cement, petrochemical, and fertilizers. Particularly if you look at steel, India is the second largest producer of steel, and our capacity is 140 to 150 million tons, somewhere in that range. And particularly if you look at the capacities, the assets that we have, about two-thirds, 60% to two-thirds of our capacity, steel capacity, the age is less than 15 years. So you can't really move on to a new process, or the cost of moving to a new process standing our existing assets is very high, which a developing India country like India can really afford. So we need to, the challenge is really what are the ways by which industry can decarbonize. So going ahead, if you look at the modern life, if you look at the our modern life is based on four pillars: cement, which is used for housing; steel, which is used for roads, bridges, highways; plastics, which is used in our day-to-day life; and ammonia, which which is used for fertilizer production. So these four sectors are all they are non-substitutable sectors in our life. The critical sectors of the economy. They are touching us in our day-to-day lives, but at the same time, they emit over 7 gigatons of emissions. And in all these sectors, the use of fossil fuel is non-replaceable, both in the form of energy, and in many cases it's part of the process. So the key challenge that we have, and particularly the Dastur as a company, focusing on industry and industrial emissions, the key challenge we see to a net zero future is how to really abate CO2 emissions from industrial sources. So coming to the steel sector, so if we look at take a global view, what is what different companies are looking for decarbonizing steel. As the previous panelist already spoke, that steel is a major CO2 emitting sector, over nearly 3 million tons of steel, and major sectors or major downstream of sectors cannot function without steel as a primary input. If you look at the developments that are happening in the recent past, there are high commodity prices, high carbon pricing. So whatever decarbonization strategies that different companies adopt, they need to be resilient and mitigate risks of adverse commodity price movements. And the choice that a lot of steel makers are facing today is when they are looking at decarbonizing, is whether they should execute carbon capture projects, or these are the major choices that they're facing if they want to, when they're looking at the question of deep decarbonization, whether they should execute carbon capture projects or shift to electrical steel making. So all these different factors are coming to play, and this is not an easy decision. And typically when we see even where companies are looking are saying that when by 2030 they want to decarbonize significantly their operations. So one of our clients is in the US is Cleveland Cliffs. They have a target of reduction of 25% CO2 emissions by 2030. So one needs to start now, because typically it will take 1 year for a company to figure out what they want to do, what is the right path for them, and 3 to 4 years for project execution. So the time to start is now, even if the target is 2030 or 2050. The target is steep. It's difficult to achieve. The time to start is now. And at least companies that are globally looking to make significant decarbonization, they are at least directionally what path they want to or what is the major pathway for their CO2 emission reduction. They are looking to make directional commitments in the next 2 to 3 years. Regulatory changes and regulatory support, these are also very important when we look at decarbonization projects, particularly to support the initial costs, both in terms of capex and opex. So the companies globally are facing is whether to continue the primary route of iron ore based, BF based route of production, or shift to secondary route of production primarily based on scrap, promoting the circular economy. So if we look at based on availability of scrap technology, how much scrap can contribute to scrap, or EF based production can contribute to steel making. So even when with growth in the current, if you look at current the current situation, scrap based, secondary based steel, and probably by 2050 it can go up to 45-50%. But even then, you have a significant part of the steel which will be produced through the primary route, through the BF route, which will contribute to over 50% of steel production. And steel production also is expected to reach grow from 1.9 million gigatons, 1.9 billion. So the contribution of primary steel making will continue to be there, and the question is how do you really decarbonize primary steel making. So these are some of the decarbonization initiatives that different companies in the world are taking. I won't spend too much time on this, because the previous panelists spoke a lot about it. But if you look at two of the key areas that a lot of steel companies are focusing on or evaluating seriously, one is carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and the other part is hydrogen-based DRI and using the DRI in a EF-based route of production. So coming to the Indian scenario, so if we look at the Indian scenario, the Indian steelmaking particularly is more energy intensive, more CO2 intensive, and primarily because of the fact that we as a country, we are rich in iron ore, we are rich in non-coking coal. So if you look at our integrated steel players, large steel players, they are primarily based on the BF route. If you look at our secondary sector steel players, they are the smaller steel manufacturers. They're primarily based on coal-based DRI route. And where we have a lot of shortages, where we are highly import dependent, is scrap and natural gas. So you have a much lower contribution of scrap and natural gas-based steel making in our country. Among different industrial sectors, the iron and steel sector is among the largest energy consumers, with nearly a quarter of the total energy consumption of all industrial sectors. And also, as I said, depending on there are different process routes, and depending on the process route, the CO2 emission per ton of crude steel could be as low as 0.6 to nearly 3 MTPA, 3 tons, particularly for the coal-based route. So if you look at the prospects of the industry going forward, with economic growth, with industrial growth, with growth of infrastructure, we see that earlier there was discussion of the 300 million ton aspirational target. But even if we don't reach that, we reach a much conservative figure of 190 to 200 million ton. We believe that the CO2 emission is almost going to double. CO2 emission from the steel sector. So right now it is estimated at about 240 million ton, and we believe that it's going to go to 450 million ton with even a very conservative growth in steel production in India. And in terms of route, what we are seeing, we are working with different steel companies, almost all the integrated steel plants who are expanding. That they are still looking at the uncertainties regarding your scrap availability, natural gas availability. So that makes them still look at the BF route as a primary route of expansion. So your mix of different process routes in the steel production breakup in India, that's not likely to change too much, because you look at a company who's going to put up 25,000, 30,000 crore rupees of capex. They don't want to risk their steel plant, the viability of steel plant on availability of scrap, on availability of natural gas. So it's most likely that at least for the next 10 years, for large steel players, your BF route is going to be the primary route of production. For small players, the coal-based DR route is going to be the primary route of steel production. So all this means that there is going to be a very high carbon footprint, and we expect, without any, if there is no specific initiative for abatement of CO2, the CO2 emission from steel is going to grow significantly in the next up to 2030. So, going forward, I would like to speak about different, approaches that Indian steel players and particularly ISPs that can be adopted by ISPs for, decarbonization. So, first is carbon capture from BF gas and coke oven gas. So, this is basically your carbon capture from the flue gas of BF and coke oven gas, and having the right kind of project design, project architecture that can also produce hydrogen as a byproduct, hydrogen or hydrogen with syngas, which can be used in different uses, and that can offset a lot of the costs of your carbon capture. So as my previous panelist rightly pointed out, that carbon capture is very expensive, and till now there is only one operating carbon capture plant in the steel industry in the world, in the UAE. But there are a lot of ways, and through which through waste gas recycling, to production of high value products, that a lot of this cost of carbon capture can be offset. But there are still this carbon capture approach can achieve significant decarbonization of 70 to 75%. But there are certainly issues related to it, and particularly in a country like India, where natural gas is in shortage, secondary emission that is required to produce electricity or steam for regeneration of the carbon capture solvent, that is certainly an issue. The disposition pathway for where do you dispose the CO2, because you are going to capture CO2 in millions of tons, and the maximum the maximum usage of CO2 that you can do in some products like certain chemicals or food and grade usage, it's hardly going to be a few 100,000 tons. So certainly disposition is a big challenge because the pore space mapping in India is not defined. There have been studies that there is significant pore space for CO2 storage in India, but at the field level, no study has really been done. This is the first approach. The second approach is use of DR in the BOF, but and this can achieve a lot of significant decarbonization. But the problem is that if you want to produce clean DR, you either need natural gas, which is availability is a challenge in India, at least in the present and the near future, or you use hydrogen to produce DR. So hydrogen, sourcing hydrogen, that's also a significant challenge in India. The third is the DR and EAF route. So with DR, you still have the challenge of, if you want to produce clean DR, you need natural gas or hydrogen. The coal-based DRI is highly polluting, and this route can achieve significant emission reduction up to 70%. But at the same time, it has dependencies on scrap availability, exposure to natural gas availability, natural gas price volatility, and also this challenge of stranding of existing assets. What do you do, especially for large integrated steel plants like SAIL, Tata Steel, almost all the large steel plants there, most of their capacity is based on the BF-BOF route. So if you think of shifting to the EAF route, what do you do with your large existing assets, the capex that you have still not fully sweated? What do you do with those assets? And the fourth approach is direct injection of hydrogen into BF. So still this is at experimental stage, and but this has the potential that if your usage of hydrogen in BF can be proven, and we can in the future produce green hydrogen at competitive costs, this has the potential to fully or substantially decarbonize steel plant operations. So if you look at all these operations, all these approaches, for us, looking at we look at decarbonization pathways, I mean, very critically, and we're very hard-nosed about it. And the way we think, the approach which we think is going to work for steel companies in India is the first one, that is primarily based on the carbon capture from BF and other gases from the steel plant. Sorry. So next, I want to talk a little bit about what has been our experience in assisting clients in their decarbonization journey across sectors, and particularly in the steel sector. So these are some of the projects that we are doing in the clean energy transition space. And particularly, I would love to talk about the first one, that is the project we are doing for Cleveland-Cliffs. They're a large steel producer in the Middle East. We are helping them capture carbon from their BF gases. And the other part is more that's in India, but that's on the policy advisory side. That's not tied to a specific plant. So we are we have just completed this work that there is regarding carbon capture policy framework for India, and we believe that the government of India is going to launch the carbon capture policy in the next 1 or 2 months, or maybe then within this calendar year. So there will be, carbon capture requires government support, policy support. So hopefully that will start to show in India. So this is one project that we are doing in the US. So this is for industrial scale carbon capture from a large steel plant in Burns Harbor. This is owned by Cleveland-Cliffs. This was earlier owned by ArcelorMittal, and they sold it off to Cleveland-Cliffs about a couple of years ago. So this is a blast furnace based unit. It's a 5 million ton unit, and so what we are doing is we are engineering the carbon capture plant for this project. And if you look at the interventions we have done, is primarily the interventions are primarily on one. This is a gas conditioning unit. So what it does is takes the available BF gas, conditions it to a water gas shift reaction, and what you get is a gas which is has a much higher concentration of CO2. So this helps in reducing significantly the carbon capture costs. Second unit is the carbon capture unit. So this is based on amine-based technology, and it's and it helps in capturing about the design is to capture about 2.8 million tons of CO2. The third part is regarding steam and power sourcing. So all carbon capture solutions, they need to be the solvents, they need to be regenerated in the process. So they require either power, either both or one of power and steam. So and that leads to indirect emissions. So we are trying to design a process by which where some of the waste heat in the plant is used to generate some of the steam and power, so that the indirect emissions are reduced. And after this carbon capture unit, basically the CO2 is produced, which will be used in a storage site. So if you try to translate this into India, this is something, this kind of infrastructure or knowledge is not there. So this is a big challenge for India. And the hydrogen rich fuel gas that will be used in the existing power plant, like the BF gas was earlier used as a byproduct gas in the powerhouse. So the hydrogen rich fuel gas, after the removal of CO2, it will be used in the existing power plant. And this because this is has a higher percentage of hydrogen, the emissions from the power plant will also reduce. This is the way it is being engineered. And apart from use of the hydrogen rich fuel gas in the power plant, we are also building a future optionality where this hydrogen rich gas can be purified through a PSA kind of system, and then the hydrogen can be used either for iron making or using DRI. So one of the ways that steel plants, including this particular steel plant, is also looking to reduce their carbon footprint is to use HBI in the steel making process. So this is one option, as well as the hydrogen can be sold as a clean hydrogen to other hydrogen producers like refinery and fertilizers. So what this optionality does is it gives the flexibility of producing hydrogen from waste gases, and clean hydrogen that too from waste gases as a value-added product, and as a source of additional revenue, which can certainly reduce the cost of carbon capture. So the key interventions, or the key ways in which we are reducing cost of this carbon capture, this particular project, and although I can't disclose the particular numbers because they are still under finalization, but they're very competitive, and particularly with the carbon capture credit that is available increasing this year, the project is becoming financially attractive. So some of the key interventions through which the cost is being reduced is by increasing the your volume, the concentration of the CO2 in the BF gas. So your the water gas shift conditioning unit that is being used, so that increases the CO2 concentration from 22% to 33%. What it does is reduces the the carbon capture island, the footprint, that reduces your equipment sizing, reduces your capex. You can capture higher volumes of gas through a single point, through a single train. On the hydrogen side, if you just look at your without the optionality of producing hydrogen, the hydrogen content in the BF gas that is increased from 12% to 32%, and this results in lower emissions from the powerhouse. And there's the future optionality also gives the option of using hydrogen as a value-added product. And like I said, the hydrogen, about 90,000 tons of hydrogen can be produced when this project is implemented, and this will substantially reduce the cost of decarbonization for the project. So I would end my presentation here, and some of the key takeaways that we as we are seeing, or we as this company strongly feel about, especially given our association with the steel sector, that primary steel making based on iron ore, based on BF route is going to stay, and decarbonizing it is going to be the key challenge, particularly for India. We have a lot of new assets. We can't, as Mr. Srivastava pointed out in his opening remarks, how do you retrofit project existing assets with decarbonization facility? That's a key challenge. The processing of waste gases to valuable products like hydrogen, like CO2, I didn't touch upon it, but CO2 to value-added products, that could significantly reduce cost of the energy transition challenge. Gas separation, carbon capture, these are well-proven technologies in other sectors. They are not proven yet in steel sector, but certainly they would have a key role to play in steel sector decarbonization. And lastly, but not least, last but not the least, that government support in terms of supporting policy, supporting projects is very important to accelerate transitions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Saurabh. Thanks a lot for the presentation. It give a new perspective. Now, at the end, we will take the question and answer session. I request Mr. Abhinav Prasad, Director Deloitte, to give his insight.
Sure. Thank you, Niteshji, and good evening, everyone. Let me share the presentation that I have. It's visible, right?
Yeah, Abhinav, it's visible. Please go ahead.
All right. So just to share the content of my presentation, just a sectoral overview. I'll not spend much time, but I'll talk about key takeaways because my fellow panelists have already spoken about. And then emission reduction and investment in different pathways. We'll talk about it based on our analysis. And some of the barriers and key enablers for the low carbon roadmap that we want to follow in iron and steel sector. Key takeaway from this slide, we want to focus that iron and steel is also fairly concentrated sector. When we analyze the top 5 steel producers in India, they account for about 62% of the production, right? Installed capacity. So that is one. The next is as per India's NDC, Ministry of Steel, the target for specific, GHG intensity is 2.4 in the BF-BF route and 2.7 in the DRI-EF route. Compared to the global average, we are presently at 2.6 tons CO2 per ton of crude steel produced, whereas global average is 1.7, which is a reflection of some of the older technologies, and we have not been able to capitalize on the energy efficiency and resource efficiency opportunities. And these are some of the emission intensity of the different routes of steel making. Just to recap of what our panelist said. So as I mentioned, the present emission intensity of our steel production is 2.6 tons CO2 per tons of crude steel. We want to achieve 2.4 by 2030 as per Ministry of Steel's recommendations. In terms of the different routes of production, 30% for BF, BOF, and DRI respectively. What we want to achieve by 2030 is a clear-cut 60-40 ratio. Then, just a second. Yeah. So I'll straight away come to now the emission reduction pathways that we have. Just to club all the opportunities, emission reduction opportunities under 5 broad categories. First in resource efficiency, the second on energy efficiency, the third on green hydrogen and renewables application in steel making. Fourth is natural gas interventions, and the fifth is CCUS. Now, there are several, technologies under all these 5 categories, and we have tried to, put some range to the different values under each of the categories. What we see that resource efficiency is something that it can be implemented right away. There is no technological challenges as such, and it can happen until 2070, which is our target year for achieving net zero. In terms of energy efficiency, we are already lagging behind in terms of an adoption of energy efficiency opportunities, compared to the global standards. So this is something that can be done. It's a low-hanging fruit. Keeping aside the challenges related to the retrofit that Mr. Srivastav mentioned in the beginning. Then you have green hydrogen and renewables. There, when green hydrogen becomes commercially available at scale, then certainly the uptake can happen. So 2030 to 2070 time horizon is something that we can, look for. In terms of natural gas intervention, especially because the price level and the supply at scale, I think green hydrogen will become much more commercially available at scale compared to natural gas. So if we take, its implementation horizon from 2050 to 2070, essentially in NG-based DRI, we can hope to adopt it at scale from 2050 onwards. CCUS also, although there are some great examples of it being experimented, and the experiments have been successful as well. But given the challenge, especially for the CCS, carbon capture and storage, not so much for CCUS, where there are market linkage problems and market demand, and also whether some viable products can be produced that has a demand in the market. So CCS in particular, considering its technological and commercial viability, 2050 to 2070 time horizon is something that we can look for. Then if we analyze different technologies and their technology readiness level, and if we can have a range from 1 to 9, 1 being the least ready and 9 being fully commercially available for adoption. So resource efficiency, if we see all the technologies, especially the ones that have a higher kind of mitigation potential, especially after the end of life BF BOF, if you want to convert it into repurpose it to scrap based, and also end of life BF BOF to DRI, then certainly in terms of technology readiness, it's not fully available, and certainly technology has been tested in real environment that can be done. And there are many other technologies in terms of resource efficiency. For example, CDQ and pulverized coal injection. Pulverized coal injection itself is not fully implemented in India. So all of these technology certainly can be adopted. If you see the range of the marginal abatement costs, when we see marginal abatement costs, essentially the total cost for abatement for a particular technology divided by the abatement potential, and we see a range of values here ranging from 3 to 131 euros per ton CO2. Especially coming to the abatement potential in terms of ton CO2 per ton of steel production, it is essentially 11 to 1,320 and 328. So coming to energy efficiency, again there are range of energy efficiency opportunities available, and obviously it is fully commercially ready for adoption. Technologically is also ready for adoption, and its marginal abatement cost would range from 22 to 265. Some of the energy efficiency definitely have a lower reduction potential while the cost is too high. Coming to a green hydrogen and renewables, essentially, hydrogen injection in DRI and hydrogen in even blast furnace, that is also possible. It is in concept stage. Certainly through experiments, it has been demonstrated that it can be done. And it has huge abatement potential, coming to the tune of even 440 ton CO2 per ton of crude steel. In terms of natural gas interventions, technology has been tested in real world environment, and large scale adoption is an issue of natural gas availability. And we can see DRI technology, NG based DRI technology, and NG even in the blast furnace. So if available at scale, certainly companies will definitely switch over. In terms of CCUS, as again I mentioned, the abatement potential is great. Is around 500 to 700 tons CO2 per ton of crude steel. What is important is essentially to understand what is the total abatement potential for energy efficiency and resource efficiency, and what is our end target. End target is essentially net zero in steel production, which is an enormous target. And energy efficiency, resource efficiency alone cannot fetch more than maximum 20% of emission reduction in the trajectory. So what we certainly have to see is, considering India's realities, certainly capacity addition. If we see, we are going to increase our capacity 4-folds in 50 years time, or 2-folds in 25 years time, which means that there will be massive capacity addition. So are we looking at only BF, BOF, or DRI can also come into play? But DRI with coal doesn't help at all. When we see India's kind of commitment towards greening the grid, it is impressive. But when you come to renewable energy, infusion in the grid, the total 38% renewable energy capacity that we have, non-fossil fuel, essentially non-fossil fuel capacity it has already resulted in up to 9% of renewable energy generation. So a lot of technologies can have to come together at the same time and in tandem to make things workable for hard to abate sectors. So for DRI, so obviously green steel is only possible through DRI technology, but there are challenges that we have to overcome. Just to give a small analysis that we have done in terms of where we are heading. So if we consider our baseline, and we just project the baseline, which is 2.6 ton CO2 per crude steel. So if we just project that, we will be at 1404 million tons of CO2 from a present level of 350 million tons. In terms of production, we are going 4-fold, as we can see. In terms of some of the big business as usual technologies that obviously we are using the Ministry of Steel target, which is around 1% of reduction in terms of emission intensity every year. So we'll end up at around 821 million tons of CO2, which is also enormous. What we tend to achieve through different technologies, and I mentioned 5 categories, and there are several technologies under each. And which technology to implement when, that's the whole challenge. And then we'll definitely be able to, there are pathways that lead to 2070 net zero. But essentially, that has to be seen in terms of the commercial and technological viability of the enabling factors. Just to give a snapshot of total quantum of reduction that we have at hand, based on the trajectory, based on the business as usual, which is going to be a realistic one, and based on the total baseline emissions from the total top level of emissions, around 1404 million tons. At 2050, it will be around 807 million tons. And at 2030, it will be 149. So bulk of the reduction are expected to happen beyond 2050, when we have alternative to fossil fuels available in terms of commercial and technological viability, and then supply chain as well. But until that time, we'll certainly have to kind of emit a lot of emissions unless there is fast track development in the alternative technologies. Just in terms of seeing the investment required for the low carbon pathway that I just showed. So if we only consider BAU scenario, which is reducing as per the trajectory given by the Ministry of Steel, that is projected in green here, right? So by 2030, the cumulative investment, this is additional investment, will be around 2.2 billion euros. For low carbon pathway technologies, it will be another 26 billion euros. By 2050, it will be, the number will change to 101 and 308 billion euros respectively. And if you see the 2070 figure, a cumulative of around 880 for the low carbon pathway technologies, and business as usual scenario of 541. So together, it is more than around 1.3, 1.4 trillion euros. So the quantum of investment required is enormous. In terms of its impact on EBITDA, I think it will take away around 30 to 40% of the present EBITDA level if you see of the steel companies. And if we want to transition to low carbon pathways, so there will be a significant impact on the operational cost of the companies. So how do we kind of how does the policy changes is going to help in this direction is a point of discussion. In terms of its impact of the low carbon trajectory, what we see on the right side is from the 2.6 level of emission intensity by 2050. If we are going to follow a business as usual case where there is some kind of reduction, 1.9 will reach at 1.96. And if we take low carbon pathway, mix of technologies that can be realistically implemented around 0.5, emission intensity. And certainly by 2070, we end up at 1.61 if we rely only on the business as usual pathway, and obviously 0 if we follow the low carbon choice of technologies. Now quickly talking about some of the key barriers and possibly some of the enablers in this low carbon pathway. In terms of technical, as my fellow panelists have mentioned, that the entire steel production is coal based, so it is still dependent on coal because it is readily available in India, and the because of the issue of alternatives, unavailability of alternatives. In terms of natural gas, the unviable price of natural gas is a barrier to production shift from blast furnace to DRI. Then in terms of some of the possible intervention in terms of using the coal-based methane. So there has been limited or very expensive exploration of coal-based methane. I think if that happens, then definitely the adoption of GRI based technology will further speed up, because the planning horizon of any of the technology or capacity intervention itself is around 10 years in iron and steel. So it's very important to start determining the different options and also its feasibility, the supply chain, all of that investment, quite early. So that would go a long way in terms of ensuring long-term sustainability of the sector, because as we mentioned that our steel consumption is going to speed up as we are targeting to become a developed world by 2047, and steel and energy definitely are the key determinants of any developed economy. So there will be a lot of capacity addition. So the alternatives in terms of the fuels and the technologies should also come to pace with the development. In terms of financing, I think low quantum of green financing, essentially from the developed nations, they had the technology transfer and the financing that they had committed that is still to be realized at a scale. Then in terms of R&D projects, what is required is to start pilot projects of different technologies that we have. We already know energy efficiency, resource efficiency are already tested and can be adopted if financing is there. But in terms of the upcoming technologies, what is required is to have national pilot projects, and it's not possible for the industry alone to bear that. And one of the recent developments I can share is obviously we came across a World Bank opportunity where they are coming out with tenders where the industry will come forward and they will kind of jointly take up the cost of detailed cost of doing the pilots. So World Bank is ready to fund all of that. So I think that is very essential to start a very detailed study in terms of pilots. And once that study is done, obviously there will be green financing available to implement those pilots. So a lot of willingness would be required from the industry to grab this opportunity. In terms of technology providers also, since technology essentially are not in India as at present, so obviously it will come at a cost. Unless the technology transfer happens, we still have to see how do we address this additional cost of the technology providers. Some of the renewable adoption, I think our government is doing a lot in terms of making renewable energy accessible to industries. But some of the interventions like waiver for interstate transmission charges for accessing RE is something that can help the industry a lot in terms of reducing the emissions. In terms of the regulatory, I'll just touch upon a couple of points. I mean, we talked about the scrap, and it can be very, very beneficial in terms of emission reduction, because we are completely doing away with a big chunk of the production process. But the domestic scrap market is very unorganized. Today, we are kind of importing about 70% of scrap from outside, right? So there is a need to organize this scrap market, and definitely, a lot of companies will come forward and adopt the scrap recycling. So the next is, even if technological developments are happening, but a cluster-based approach is essential, especially for hydrogen, utilizing hydrogen and supply of hydrogen, and also captured carbon in a particular region. India, thankfully, at least in the eastern part, the iron steel industry is located. So the pipelines, if we are thinking of long-term availability of hydrogen and discharge of captured carbon, then a grid has to be planned in that region itself. That will make the changeover possible. So a lot of regulatory, financial, and technical support is required to the industry to fast track the adoption towards low carbon transition. Needless to mention that it is need of the hour. We are already reaching a tipping point, and iron steel sector has a lot of catch up to do. With that, I'll stop my presentation, and then we can open for discussion. Niteshji, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Abhinav. Basically, we are having three experts, three stalwarts from their fields, from Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and Aman Duster. So thanks a lot for your presentation. I think this is the moment where most of the steel maker can have a lot of clarity how this would go further in producing greener steel, and also doing various interventions so that we can come out with energy efficient as well as very cleaner steel. So I believe there are people, a lot of audience are there who are ready to ask few questions. So we can have a questions session for all of you. So basically, anyone can just type their question, the questions or comment box. So the first question is I have received from Mr. Ravindra Kohli. The question is, what type of government support and government policies are foreseen to achieve this target? by 2030, that is 2.4 ton CO2 per ton of crude steel. So this is a question from Mr. Kohli. Anyone, Abhinav or Gokul or Saurabh, you can just, any one of you can answer this question. Government policy and government support for CO2 reduction.
Yeah, I can just give my first comment. So the government policy, there are policies. It's, government has taken up actions, okay, which to just answer Mr. Kohli's question is that number one, even the green hydrogen policy itself is another policy which is going to be helpful for all the steel makers to look at that as an option. Right, that's number one. Number two is that there's a lot of, I understand there's a lot of R&D activities also is being taken up to bring in innovative technologies into the market. And what we understand from the industry, because I work with a lot of private clients here, so they all look at some policies which are stable in nature over a period of the investment cycle. Okay, say for example, if there are frequent changes in the policies, right, so that itself actually put the industry into trouble. So that, because it's connected with a lot of financial related aspects. So they're looking for a stable policy, which is more important. And last, of course, the government is also actually looking up certain R&D projects. I understand they are trying to develop some design guidelines and specifications for utilization of slag, because slag is the major area. Suppose if that slag is being used for road construction, so one way or the other we can able to get out of that. And then there is some kind of an activity which is also going on around improvements around the electric arc furnace in the steel by the IIT. Right. So these are some of the aspects which government has actually taken up. Because government will try to primarily take up initiatives around either make sure that we get either the fuels at a subsidized rate, or I would say some of the policies which alleviate some of the challenges around usage of the fuels. क्या पास है?
Mr. Nitesh, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Gokul. Abhinav and Saurabh, would you like to add something what Gokul has just added regarding government support and government policies?
Yeah, certainly. We are working with different steel players, both integrated steel players like SAIL as well as smaller companies. Let's say they have our operations a range of 0.51 million ton. When they think about their expansion, they think hard about what is going to happen in terms of their carbon footprint and whether they should invest in different technologies. But there is no financial incentive right now that a steel maker has to invest in low carbon technologies. Most of us, or almost all our steel is consumed in India. Very little is exported. So it's also not that they have to be, let's say, competitive in low carbon markets like Europe. So I think like the government has rolled out the PLI scheme in different sectors, PLI for low carbon products, especially steel products, certainly that can be considered to give steel makers a financial incentive to invest, because whatever route you take to reduce your carbon footprint, it has risk, it has costs. So there should be some way to address that. And particularly, I talked a lot about carbon capture because we as a firm firmly believe that the scale of decarbonization challenge that you have, carbon capture is the route that needs to be adopted, and particularly given our endowment of raw materials, we also need to use our raw material endowment like coal, like iron ore, and iron ore quality is also reducing over time. So we need to be material. We need to have a security on materials, energy. So we need to use our natural endowment. So particularly in that context, carbon capture becomes very important. So certainly policy is required for carbon capture. It is there in Europe, it's there in US, and hopefully Indian government will take action sooner than later. And particularly disposition of CO2, this is a big challenge, and a lot of exploratory work needs to happen for your exploring where there is pores, for mapping the pore space. And certainly in East India, the preliminary or high level studies indicate there is pore space, but at field level studies, these studies need to be done for anyone to invest in low carbon steel production. Thank you.
Okay, okay, Saurabh.
I would like to
Maybe-
add here.
maybe-
Nitesh,
Yeah, Abhinav.
I would like to, Nitesh, this is Naveen.
Yes, yes, sir. Navish.
I would like to add here what Saurabh has just recently figured out about the government's initiative regarding giving some incentive to low carbon steel makers. I have a submission like that is the government's part. But as far as the steel maker is concerned, almost half of the emission comes from blast furnace, the iron making process in BF route. If you reduce our carbon rate, the coke rate, and if you enhance your PCI, so automatically you get benefited directly. Your bottom line is directly affected once you, because major component, major chunk of steel production, the cost comes from coke, coal. So directly you are benefited. So what I mean to say that government will definitely take their call. But as a steel maker, we need not to wait for the government to make a policy. We should straightway focusing on our low carbon steel making process through our reducing our coke rate and enhancing our PCI. That's what I wanted to add on.
Yeah, definitely. That is because that is something very important as far as coke rate and CDI rate is concerned. Abhinav,
Just like, yeah,
yeah,
I'll
please,
be
man.
very quick. Just a couple of points, will not repeat the ones that have been mentioned already. Just a quick policy enabler from government side will definitely help in terms of maybe waiving the import duty on the purchase of scrap, maybe reduction of GST, from the purchase of domestic scraps. So these two can definitely work well. Then also maybe waiving the state transmission charges for using these electricity for renewable energy, accessing renewable energy. So I think these areas are certainly are areas where government can help the industry to fast track the adoption.
Yeah,
Agree with
yeah.
the other points mentioned by the panelists.
Yeah, sure. Actually, we have another one question regarding dry CHSGP. How much this is going to impact, that is dry cast house migration plant, as far as CO2 is concerned. Anyone would like to answer regarding dry CHSGP? Yeah, Saurabh, any your take?
No, I don't know about this. Sorry, I'll have to get back.
Okay. One thing I noticed in the Google presentation, I think 21%, whopping 21% is being emitted during sinter making. Gokul, what are the interventions that we can have in reducing this particular emission from sinter making? What are the technical intervention that we can do? Because this iron making and sinter making that I found, the percentage was very high. What's your take on it, Gokul? Yeah, Gokul, are you getting me?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you come again? I think I lost you.
Yeah. In your presentation, I found 21% was the share of this sinter making.
Okay.
As far as GHG is concerned.
Yeah.
So, what are the intervention that steel makers can have in reduction of this CO2 emission? From this sinter making path, from the sinter making operation. What are the few technical intervention that we can have?
Okay, so yeah, I can just add a couple of points, but I'm not a very techie steel guy. So what we have seen in our couple of energy efficiency projects that I have done. Number one, that there is a lot of waste gases which are getting recovered. That's number one. Wherever possible, there is a waste gas recovery. I think waste gas recovery, in my view, is going to be the major one. Okay. But in terms of the upcoming technology, which I mentioned in my presentation, also there is a Finex, technology which is being followed, or which is being adopted by Costco, right? If you see that, they are even completely avoiding the sintering process altogether, right? Because for the newer plants, directly using the iron ore technology, into the fluidized bus reactor, right? And the gas from melting gasifier is directly being used into into the manufacturing of or into preheating of those iron ores and charging it back to the melting gasifier. So that is certainly going to be a technology. In my view, it's going to be there in the future, right? Other than that, I think many of the interventions, energy efficient interventions, could certainly, it's quite possible. Probably I may not be able to know many one, but I think waste gas recovery in one of the projects that we have implemented, we have estimated there is a potential for that.
Okay, that's I think that is one of the solution. We have a question from Mr. Rohit Ranjan. What would be the cost impact % with respect to per ton of crude steel while adopting various grid technologies? So, what is the approx amount?
For which technology?
So I think Abhinav, the various technologies that you had discussed regarding basically energy efficiency. So, what are the approx price per ton of crude steel regarding the technology that are possible that we can adopt it by 2030? So, what is the approx cost on per ton of iron crude steel? That what is the impact of that?
I mean, there are various technologies in terms of, it will be difficult to tell you the technologies per ton of steel, but definitely per ton of CO2 is something which we have calculated for as marginal abatement cost. I mean, in terms of blast furnace process control, for example, improve process control, neutral networks in EAF, BUF gas recovery, all of which are range between 22 to around 265 euros per ton of CO2 abatement. So have to check in terms of absolute cost in terms of per ton of steel, but in terms of abatement, there is a big range that one can use, and there are several technology: coal moisture control, scrap preheating, top pressure recovery turbines, waste heat recovery in sinter plant, all of that. So yeah, in terms of abatement cost is something that we can definitely explain.
Yeah, I think that answers the question, Abhinav. I have a question for Saurav. Actually, there are companies in India which are going for syngas. That means using coal gasification, they are going for that using domestic coal. So, what's your take on this, Saurav? How this is going to impact the CO2 emission in long term? That means coal gasification, because India is having coal, but they're not having coal with coal is having with high ash content. So how syngas is going to help us in long term?
Yeah, certainly coal gasification. If you look at coal gasification, JSPL is doing it at Angul. Their existing gasifiers, they have more or less stabilized operationally, and certainly it helps in carbon abatement. But provided you can use the CO2, the advantage of gasifier operation is that because carbon capture is part of the process, you can get 95% CO2, 95% purity CO2 as part of the process without making any additional investment. But right now, JSPL is just venting that CO2. So net, there is no reduction of CO2. But if that could be used, and they're also looking at partially using it for some value-added products, but the scale is such that ultimately you need to put it in the ground, you need to geosequester it. Certainly, if that can be done, there can be significant reduction in CO2. But there are also on the gasification side, there are challenges with high ash coal. What technology is going to work for Indian coal? That it has been tried by JSPL, but there is only one reference till now for coal gasification in India, especially at industrial scale. Simfer is doing something, but at much smaller scale. So there are, I think there are two challenges to summarize my answer. One is there are technology challenges with respect to high ash coal of India, but but we believe that fluidized bed technology can work in Indian conditions. At least that is the experience in China. And but the other challenge is with respect to you have separated the CO2, you have a high purity CO2, you have it at low cost. What do you do with it? If you just vent it, you don't really reduce your CO2 emissions.
Yeah, that is one of the issues, Saurav, definitely. Okay, one question to all the three panelists. Anyone can answer. What is the commercial viability of use of biomass as a fuel, as far as iron making concerned? Anyone can answer. Commercial viability of using biomass.
So biomass, the main challenge that we see is, and it's not only in India, and we work quite a bit in the US also. Your supply chain is a big problem, and even we were trying to conceive a project at at 400 or 500,000 tons of biomass supply per year, and not in the northeast region where it is supposed to be abundantly available, but supply chain is a big issue. Even power companies in India who have put up biomass based power plants, they face a significant issue regarding consistent availability of biomass. So biomass has potential, but there are significant challenges on the supply chain side. That is my quick response.
Okay, yeah, I think we can take the, we are going to end this webinar. We can take the last question. Abhinav, are you seeing the possibility of this carbon credit market soon, to be active in India?
Right, absolutely. So there are a lot of developments that are happening at the national level. Government has already come out with a blueprint for a national carbon market. And a lot of work is being done to create an online platform where participants can join and sell their carbon credits based out of all the emission reduction technologies. So certainly there is a lot of hope. I think within a year we certainly will be expecting to hear a portal for where such trading can happen. But even when the national carbon is not developed, there are other voluntary carbon markets available globally where any emission reduction opportunity can be incentivized. Vera is one of them, Gold Standard and GCC. All of them are taking energy efficiency projects, fuel switch projects. So it's about identifying the projects and starting the project development for carbon credit at the right time. So I think as per the projections also, the carbon market itself is going to grow, around 10 to 20 times in 5 to 10 year period. So yeah, a lot of optimism in carbon market. But before that, I just want to quickly address one of the questions that is directed to me by Mr. Kohli regarding hydrogen green production. So my suggestion was not related to production, but in terms of using green hydrogen in blast furnace. You can certainly replace coal with natural gas in blast furnace, but using green hydrogen in blast furnace is also a possibility, but is only at the experimental stage where it is a kind of a success. And also green hydrogen injection in the DRI technology. So from that perspective, it is yet to reach kind of a level of maturity. I hope I was able to answer your question correctly. Yeah, Niteshji, over to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Abhinav, this is Naveen Srivastava again. Talking about the carbon market, you have just recently figured out that Indian government is coming out with some policy. Do you think when PAT mechanism is in place, we have already getting incentivized through our energy efficiency is good? So do you think this carbon market is required at this point of time if this PAT mechanism is in matured stage? Because then it is basically duplicating the things. Because either you earn through energy certificates or earn through carbon certificate. Both cannot go hand on hand. What I feel. What's your take on this?
You're absolutely right. I think your concerns are valid. But the idea of this carbon market is to become more encompassing, not only restrict to the designated consumers, but open up for other industries as well. That is one take. The other take is it's not that the PAT will go out. There'll be some fungibility that will be devised to allow PAT certificates and others also in the market. So I don't think the steel industry will tend to lose out in this aspect.
So I will just add, Mr. Naveen, like what was talking about. Even the recently, the government is also looking at launching it in a kind of a platform where they would like to look at RECs, PAT, and any other form of carbon related options, right, together to form a kind of a carbon credits, right? So you will have PAT, REC, and the carbon credits, voluntary carbon credits are going to be merged, could form a carbon market. Number two, this carbon market is going to be beneficial only for us because, for example, if we are trying to avoid carbon emissions, for example, you put up some kind of a project which can avoid say methane emissions, right? So what will happen is that you will be avoiding that project, and that project will potentially contribute to a potent carbon credit project, and the revenue from the sale of carbon credits could be used for decarbonization. It's kind of a circular in nature. So that's where it's going to be helpful for the market. It's actually it's more comprehensive in nature. So in that way, we need to have a voluntary carbon markets with us, and that's certainly going to be beneficial. So that's of course my point of view.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gokul, for adding the perspective. I think we have come to end of this webinar. And I would like to thank all the three eminent panelists, Mr. Gokul from Director Ernst & Young, Mr. Saurav, Business Unit Leader Consulting, M. Duster, Mr. Abhinav Prasad, Director Deloitte. I would also like to thank Mr. Jagdish Singhal, Chairman, Environment Engineering Division in IEI, and Chairman, Bokaro City Local Center, Mr. Naveen Prakash Srivastav, and Honorary Secretary, Bokaro Local Center Institute of Engineers, Mr. Sunil Kumar. I'd like to thank all the eminent guests who joined this webinar, and it was a wonderful experience. Right now, we have a lot of insight how steel sector can move ahead and can produce steel in a way which is environment friendly and contribute for the development of this nation. Because steel is going to play a very important role in making a climate resilient society, and it is something which last 100 years the humanity has boasted upon, and the next 100 years this is going to play a very important role. So it's very important to decarbonize the industry, and this webinar I think believe will act as a something which will guide a lot of people and steel makers how to move forward. So thanks a lot for your time and your effort, and I am just signing off on behalf of engineers. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Naveen. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Hello. Sir,